Hey folks, welcome to the stream. We're going to just jump right in and start building out the Access Analyzer in CloudFormation. If you're not familiar with the Access Analyzer, essentially what this allows us to do is understand access to our account from outside a zone of trust. You can set this up for an entire AWS organization or a single account within an organization. Tonight we're just going to go with a single account deployment of this solution just to kind of demonstrate how it looks. And when I was getting ready for this, you can see on my screen that defining the Access Analyzer resource within CloudFormation is pretty basic. So what I thought we would do is take this a step further, build out this CloudFormation. And in previous streams, I've talked a little bit about what our workflow looks like in GitLab. So I thought today we could actually build out a really simple CI that would give you an idea of how we build all of the templates that we create for customers, the templates that are available to our managed customers through our basically template as a service offering. So I thought that's what we would do tonight. And we're going to just jump right in and start writing some code. So let me just switch over to the editor. And what I've done prior to this is set up a really simple project. So I've got it built out already, and I've got a screenshot ready to go. When I ran through the demo of this, just to make sure that I had the logic sorted out, I realized that there is a ton of information that is sensitive in nature, in the fact that there's a lot of 12-digit account IDs here. The way that we have our account set up, there actually is a fair amount of outside access to our IAM, or to our account through IAM cross-account roles and things like that. Doesn't mean that they're bad, but there's a bunch of information in there that I just don't think is probably something I want to be sharing. So I took a screenshot. We'll show that at the end as we get everything wrapped up. Okay. So for now, what I'm going to do is create kind of a placeholder for the CI. And we use GitLab, so we'll just create a GitLab YAML template for the CI. And I also like to, for building this project, we would build out a simple ignore file as well. So I'll just put dsstore in there for now. You could put whatever you'd like in here. I'm using PyCharm, and JetBrains actually has kind of a standard, or a template that we would normally use here, but I'm not really going to get into a whole lot excuse me, in this project, so I don't really think it matters outside of creating this kind of as our foundation, at least to demonstrate it. As we've done in the past, I'll create, what are we going to call this? Yeah, let's just call it Access YAML. And we'll give it a basic description. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Like I've done in my previous streams, we'll set up a placeholder for parameters, and then we'll define our resource. So in this really easy example, we're just going to set up Analyzer 0 and define its type as, I have to go back and look at the docs here. I forget what this one is. Access Analyzer Analyzer. There we go. Got it. So let's just flip back to the documentation here and have a look at what we have to define. Right. So we have to give it a name. Not required. So you could let the CloudFormation engine do this for you. We'll define it today just to make it easier, so we can find it after the fact. You can create a bunch of archive rules. So what this allows us to do is do some filtering. So you'll see in the screenshot that I'm going to share at the end, what essentially is going to happen once the analyzer is deployed is within, when I did this setup, within really about maybe 10 minutes max, I think it was, I had information about access outside of my zone of trust. And in this case, my zone of trust was just the single AWS account that I created. And some of that access is expected. Right? I mentioned earlier on that we do cross-account access for everything. So I saw some IAM access that I knew came from what we call our support account. I think I've mentioned that a couple times in previous streams. You're going to see here in the GitLab portion of this demo tonight, we use cross-account access again from our CloudFormation for our CloudFormation implementation coming from GitLab. So we trust that. So essentially what the archive rules allows us to do is, I almost like the idea of calling these filters instead. We could say, hey, you know what? Findings that you discover from account XYZ are okay. And you can just auto archive those findings. So they're still recorded, but they don't show as active findings in the Access Analyzer. And then we've got our regular tagging, best practice. Again, I think I've mentioned a couple times, define tags that you want to use across your entire organization. So I'll set up our kind of default tags here. Okay. And then the type is, I mentioned before, we can set up the analyzer for an entire organization, which would cover all of the accounts within that AWS organization, or we can set it up for an individual account. Tonight, we're just going to set it up on an individual account. We have a demo account that we use within our overall organization, so I'm going to set that up. You can see here, really the only thing that is required to define an Access Analyzer in CloudFormation is the type definition here at the end. We're gonna do a few extra things here just to demonstrate some capabilities, but essentially all you need to do is define the type and you're ready to go. So back here, we're gonna give this a name, right? And we'll just call it Demo Analyzer. And archive rules, I'm not gonna define here. So what we need is our type definition, and in this case it's account, and then tags. And this is where I'll set up, before we go any further, our defaults. And if you followed the stream before, these will look familiar by now. Okay. The default is always Curious Orbit. If you have a problem with the template, who do you call? All right, so an email address. And then we always like to set up an environment. So development, and then we like to use the loud values here. If you've never seen this before, what this provides us is the mechanism to control what somebody can put in this environment parameter. And when we see this in the console, if you were to deploy this through the console, you would essentially get a drop-down list, right? And that drop-down list would have, let's say, development, production, and test. We're going to set this because we're going to deploy this through through GitLab, a simple CI script like we would normally do. I'll define these in the CI template itself. Okay, so there's our parameter setup, and then all we need to do down here is go pass these values in, right? Not sure why it's adding an extra dash here. Not sure if I've got my spacing messed up or not, but we'll see when we try to run this through CloudFormation what it says to us. So essentially, that is it. Super easy to deploy this, and this would be one of those things that, there's no downside to enabling this. The other nice thing about the Access Analyzer is once it's enabled, it will automatically allow you to also get S3 Access Analyzer, which does the same thing but for the S3 service. What it does is it provides us with information about the current configuration of the S3 buckets in our account or within the organization, again, depending on the Access Analyzer configuration. So it'll show you bucket policies. It will identify situations where you don't have maybe as secure bucket policies as you might want, right? You've got buckets that allow public access, things like that. So two birds, kind of one stone here, right? Deploy this, you get information about how your IAM configuration, but also your S3 configuration. So no reason to not to deploy this. So that's essentially it, right? Really super easy. So we're going to change gears a little bit, and we're going to go back to our GitLab CI script. And I'll just show you kind of a general structure that we like to use for deploying these in an automated way. So we often set up what I like to call global variables, things that I want to use across all of the stages that we're going to define, and very similar to what we saw in the previous, or in the template itself, it's going to look like this. And we'll set the the default environment to development. Another thing that we like to do is we like to set up something called project. Within our GitLab environment, we've got now, the last time I looked, well over 100,000 lines of code that we've written, YAML templates that we've written. And in some cases, you know, later on you want to go back and you want to have a look at maybe a specific, where did a stack come from? So what we've started to do now is tag all of this information with a project code, or basically it's a path. So in this case, I have a Curious Orbit group, and within that I have demo, and that's a group, and then I've created I think I just called it Access Analyzer. So this is just a reference that we could use later on to easily go and find this project in our GitLab environment. So that's something else that we set up. Next thing we need to do is set up our stages. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run a really simple validate command. Okay? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say Analyzer validate. So that's just the name. And we're going to define this as the validate stage. And then we're going to define the script that we want to run. I always forget this. It's template body, and I think the structure is like that. Let me just check my cheat sheet. Yeah, I think that'll work. So what we've got at this point is we're just going to run the CloudFormation validate template CLI command, and this is just a really simple way to check for some basic errors within our YAML template. So it's going to check for syntax, right? Like poor spacing, things like that. If you've defined parameters or you've referred to a parameter that doesn't exist, it will highlight those types of things for you. So very, very basic checking. You know, you might want to go further than this with using something like CFN linter, or maybe the new CFN engine, right? As a rule engine, I think it's called, as a way to kind of add some additional validation to your templates. But for today we're just going to use the simple validate template command. And at this point, I usually stop. And what I do now is I actually just check all this code in, and that will fire off the build process the first time. And by build process, I really just mean execute this simple CloudFormation template. I'm not sure why this isn't lighting up. I set the repo up, so I'm going to check this in outside of the editor, so just bear with me a sec here. Oh, I see what I've done. Hold on a second. Always user error, right? And I have a bad structure here, so let me try this again. Okay. So I initialized my repo in the wrong directory when I was getting ready. So let me just set this up. Now let's see if PyCharm sees it as a repo yet. It does not. So I'm just going to say git commit. Normally I'd do all this in the editor, but since I messed it up, add the files, make a commit, and we're just going to push it. All right, so what we should see here, I'll switch over to our repo. Right, and you can see right away I've got an error. So this will be either a syntax error in my CI script itself or something I've done wrong in the actual template. So you can see here, unrecognized resource. So I knew I was going to mess that up. So this is the type of thing that even just simple little CloudFormation, I guess CloudFormation validate template command will help us with. So let me find my editor here. I'm going to cheat a little bit because I can't seem to type this, and we're just going to, I'm going to grab this out of the documentation. There, oh, see what I did? Dropped a colon here at the end. Didn't type that properly. So let's see if this is recognized in Git yet. It is not for some reason. Okay, so we'll do this in command line. All right, just repushed that. Go back over here. All right, so that's what I wanted to see. Whoops. So at least we know now that that template validated, right? The CloudFormation template, or the CloudFormation validate template command executed, and this is what you would get, just some simple JSON output. So that means what we would normally do now is add the deploy stage. And obviously this is going to be a really simple deploy stage, but it will illustrate what we want. So the thing that I always forget to do is I always forget to add the stage. So I'm going to say deploy Anlayzer. My stage, and then I'll define that down here. Okay. And what we would often do is set up variables. So I call these my global variables up here, and then I would maybe set down here what I'll call stage variables, things that I want for this particular deployment. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, we usually say a stack name. So let's say, actually I keep calling that Analyzer Access. Let's do Analyzer demo. Okay, and then I go in here and actually run the scripts, the deploy scripts. So I'm going to say AWS CloudFormation, give it the path to the file, and a stack name. And this is where I just refer back to our stage variable. Okay. One of the things that we always do, even on our first deploy like this, is we generate change sets. I think I mentioned earlier on in one of the earlier streams, change sets are great for a number of reasons. It allows us to practice kind of this idea of separation of duty. One person is responsible for the templates, like creating the templates like I am now, and quite often we may have a customer actually do the deploys, or another person on the team, depending on what type of work we're doing for that customer. That's one great reason to use change sets. Another reason that change sets are super important is they're going to protect yourself from yourself when you're maybe not paying as much attention as you should be. There's been a couple times in my past where I've been deploying something like this and you just put in the wrong file name, right? Like let's say I had an IAM template in here that is going to create a whole bunch of roles and things like that. If I just run a CloudFormation update command, it's just going to execute. It's going to change what I want, which is in some cases could be catastrophic, right? It could replace a whole bunch of resources that you weren't intending to be replaced. So a change set allows us to separate roles, right? One person's responsible for the creation of the template, another person is responsible for the deployment of that template, but it also gives us that opportunity to validate what we are going to change before we change it. Okay, so we always use change sets. I'm going to change this back to access.yaml, and then there's a bunch of things that we add here. Okay, so this is where we set up the change set. Basically, generate a change set, don't execute that change set. The other thing that we add is I have to look at this because it's a long option. Empty change set. So don't fail on an empty change set. If you don't have this and you push, what will happen is your CI pipeline will just stop working or it could stop working. Let's say the first template in your pipeline doesn't have any changes. It's going to just execute try to execute a change set and say there are no changes and fail. None of the other templates in your workflow or your pipeline will actually be executed. So this allows us to say, hey, generate an error. It'll basically say there's no changes to be deployed, but keep going. Don't fail if you have an empty change set. Okay. Mentioned tagging a couple times already, right? So let's set up our tags. And this is where we look at the global variables that we set earlier on. Okay, and they look just like the ones that we set in the template itself. Environment. And the one new one that we have here is our project. Which I can't spell. There we go. Okay. So there's our tags. Let's see what else we've got here. We don't have to worry about any overrides, and I didn't set this earlier, so we'll go back and set this up. The way that we do all of our deploys is we have a centralized GitLab deployment, and we use cross-account access to all of our accounts. So that means on the GitLab EC2 instance, I need a way for the GitLab runner to assume a role in another account, and the way that we do that is through cross-account access. So I've got this set up already. I'm 95% sure it's called CO demo, so this is our Curious Orbit demo account. And what we've got now is our validate stage and then our deploy stage. So this should, if I've typed everything properly here, deploy the analyzer through CloudFormation in our demo account, even though the GitLab instance is in our support account. Okay, so let me just check this in again, and we'll see what happens. All right, so all right. There's our analyzer validation again. We know that worked already, and now we're doing our deploy. So you can see right here, change set created successfully. So we could run more commands on the command line to validate or to see what is being proposed as a change. Instead, we're going to jump over to the CloudFormation console. We'll refresh this. I thought it dumped us in here. Ah, interesting. Let me just check something here. Okay, that's not what I want. Where did this go? For some reason that went into, let me just check the roles here. I can't show you this because again there's a fair amount of stuff that isn't for public consumption. Just give me one sec. I'm going to check our GitLab deploy here. Probably just a typo. Yeah, okay. So I've just got a typo when I created the role. So bear with me a sec here. I'm going to make a quick change, which should fix this for us. So what I've done here is I mentioned cross-account access. What I've done is just copied the wrong role. So this is actually deploying into a different account, one of our other test accounts. So let me just grab very quickly what we need. And we'll update this. Yeah, this is the problem with demos. You never know where they're going to go on you. Hold on. Yeah, that role does not want to work for us. So I'm just going to make another change here. We're going to make this work for the purposes of a demo. So just bear with me a second here. Okay, we'll try this again. Let me flip back to the browser. We'll try this again. I want to see if it's just deployed in a region. Yeah, okay, so it's not there either. So let's try it again. So we're going to go back, and we'll actually do it this way. We'll go back in here and we can just rerun the deploy. Let's see what it does. Yeah, it's not able to assume that role now. All right, well, when all else fails, we're going to push this into our support account rather than making you sit and watch me figure out why our role isn't working. So let's remove that. And let me just find a region in our support account that we can use. So go back here. Okay, there's nothing in Ohio, so we're going to use Ohio. And what we have to do now is I removed the profile out of here, so it's not using CO demo. And what I want to do now is, I know I have a default region set up already, so I'm going to override that and use US East 2, which I think is Ohio. Yeah. Okay, so we'll push this change. Lots of little glitches happening on us tonight. All right, so that's updated. Back to the browser and have a look at our pipeline. Okay, so it's running again. Let's see if this works this time. Okay, good. We got the check mark. So the easy way to check this, there we go. That's what I was expecting to see in our demo. Not sure why that role isn't playing nicely, but this is what you end up with when you run that execute no change set. What happens is it generates this. Now this is a really simple example. What I'm looking for here is the type of action. So in this case, we're adding a new resource. In this case, we called our definition in the template Anlayzer 0, tells us the resource type. And this is actually, in my opinion, the most important column. If you remember when we looked at the CloudFormation documentation, if we flip back here, there's a really important part of this documentation. Update requires something. Replacement, no interruption. You could have one in here. I want to say it's called a partial interruption. So it may have to change a resource, but not necessarily. So really what I want to do is just make sure that, you know, unless I'm expecting it, I don't have any of those proposed replacements here as set as, I think it says true. Okay. It's going to replace that resource. If I'm happy with this, then I can execute the change. And this is where you might be working with a teammate, right? One person deploys the template, one person creates the template, another person actually deploys it. So this should take almost no time at all. There we go. We have the analyzer running, right? And this is where I'm a little reluctant to show you what happens once that analyzer has been deployed. So I created a screenshot, which is back here. So let me show you this. And I just dumped it in our GitLab repo, and that is really small. Hang on one sec. Let me open that in the browser instead. Give me a sec. Change back here. So this will be a little easier to see, I think. Oh, it only lets me zoom in once. So this is what I ran yesterday, and you can see there's the name of my analyzer, the zone of trust. I deployed it only in a single account, so that's why I've got just the account ID set here. Okay. Some information about the analyzer itself, the tagging information. And then down at the bottom, what we're seeing are the IAM resources that provide access outside of this zone of trust, that account. And you can see why I didn't necessarily want to show you this live, because all of the account IDs are spread all over this. So we're using single sign-on. So we've got a couple roles here for Amazon's SSO. You can see that we're using AWS organizations. So when you set that up, there's an AWS organizational IAM role that's set up. And here's the cross-account, one of the cross-account roles that we would normally have as well. So this is where I would go back and generate or create an archive finding. And this in the template would say, this is expected, this is expected. It allows you to do some filtering so that you don't get active findings for access that you expect to see. Okay, so pretty simple little walkthrough tonight on how you can very quickly deploy the IAM Access Analyzer with a CloudFormation script, and then it gave you an idea of how we would normally build a really simple pipeline to deploy this. So that's all I really wanted to go through tonight. It's short. Thanks everybody for watching. Enjoy your Tuesday evening. We'll be back next Tuesday with another walkthrough of something in CloudFormation. So thanks everybody. I think we'll wrap up there. Take care.